You think oversleeping is a modern sin, a snooze button pressed too many times, a quiet, private shame between you and your alarm clock. It isn't modern at all. 2,000 years before smartphones tracked your sleep debt, Rome had already turned lateness into a crime, and in one part of the empire, into a death sentence. For most of us today, missing an alarm costs an awkward apology to a boss. In Rome, it could cost you your income, your reputation, or in the case of one unlucky group of men, your life. This wasn't superstition. It wasn't exaggeration passed down through legend. It was written policy, recorded by the historians who lived closest to it. So, how did an empire without clocks as we know them enforce punctuality this brutally? And why does the answer say more about power than about sleep itself? Think about how casually you treat the boundary between sleeping and waking. You choose it, mostly. You negotiate with it. In the ancient world, that boundary was rarely yours to negotiate alone. Someone else, a patron, an officer, an overseer, usually held the other end of the rope, and how tightly they pulled on it determined whether your morning was merely inconvenient or genuinely dangerous. Start with the ordinary Roman morning, because everything begins there. Historian A. Roger Ekirch, who spent decades studying how humans slept before electric light reshaped the night, has shown that pre-industrial sleep was rarely one uninterrupted block. People woke in the dark. They dozed by firelight, drifted in and out, let the body set its own pace rather than a clock. Sleep, in most of human history, was loose, negotiable, tied to the sun rather than to a rigid schedule. That looseness sounds almost peaceful. In Rome, it collided head-on with one of the most punishing social rituals ever built into a city's morning. It was called the Salutatio. Every morning, before the sun had fully cleared the rooftops, hundreds of men across Rome rose in the dark, dressed in their best togas, and walked through unlit, uneven streets toward the home of a wealthier, more powerful man, a patron. This wasn't polite small talk over breakfast. It was survival dressed up as courtesy. Classical historian Ray Lawrence, who has written extensively on daily life and the experience of time in ancient Rome, describes how a client's entire livelihood could hinge on this single visit. Arrive early enough to be seen, greet your patron by name, and you might receive the Sportula, a small daily stipend of coin or food. Arrive late, and the door might already be shut against you. Miss it too many mornings in a row, and your name quietly vanished from the guest lists, the legal favors, and the protection that kept an ordinary Roman family from falling through the cracks of the city. Feel that pressure for a moment. No alarm clock waiting on a nightstand, no phone light to check the time, just roosters, the slow shift of gray light through a shuttered window, and the sinking knowledge that if you slept even a little too long, an entire month of income could unravel before you'd even opened your eyes. And here is where the story gets strange. Rome did not measure the morning the way you do. The Roman day was split into 12 hours, but those hours were not fixed, uniform 60-minute blocks. They stretched and shrank with the seasons, tracked on public sundials and on water clocks called Clepsydra, first brought into wide civic use in the 2nd century BCE. An hour in the height of June was considerably longer than an hour in the dead of December. Being on time, in other words, wasn't a fixed target you could memorize once and rely on forever. It was a moving one, quietly recalculated by the sky itself, day after day. Try, for a second, to imagine building your entire career around a clock that changed length every single morning without warning. For the wealthy, that shifting flexibility was almost survivable, something to be managed with servants and careful planning. Wealthy households even kept a designated slave whose entire task was watching the sundial or the water clock and waking the master at the correct hour, a living alarm system built entirely around another person's exhaustion. For the ordinary client standing in the cold outside a locked door, none of that cushioning existed. Lateness became a quiet, brutal filter. It sorted who mattered from who didn't, and the sorting mechanism was something as simple, as human, as how fast a tired person could drag themselves out of bed and across an unlit city. But the story doesn't end with disappointed patrons and lost stipends. It escalates, and it escalates hard. Because Rome didn't only punish oversleeping socially through slammed doors and vanished favors. Along its frontiers, it punished oversleeping militarily, with a severity that still stuns historians who encounter it for the first time. So, let's reconstruct a night on the wall of a Roman legionary camp. A sentry stands watch during one of the 4 assigned night shifts, called the Vigiliae, each roughly 3 hours long, timed by a small water clock handed from guard to guard as the night wore on. He has marched all day under a full pack. His eyelids feel like lead. Somewhere beyond the earthworks and the ditch, an enemy scouting party could be moving in the dark. His entire job, quite literally, is to stay awake long enough that 5,000 sleeping men around him do not die in an ambush they never saw coming. Now ask yourself honestly, what happens if he fails? What happens if his body simply gives out? According to the ancient historian Polybius, who documented Roman military law and discipline with unusual precision, a sentry caught asleep at his post faced one of the most feared punishments in the entire army, the Fustuarium. The condemned soldier would be brought forward in front of his own unit. Then, on a signal from the tribune, his fellow legionaries, the very men whose lives his failure had endangered, would beat him with clubs and stones until he was dead. Anyone who tried to run from that punishment was treated as a deserter and hunted down regardless. There was no quiet, private version of this consequence. It happened in front of everyone by everyone's hands. Why so extreme for something as human as falling asleep? Because in a Roman camp, sleep was never truly private. It was tactical. One man's exhaustion instantly became everyone else's exposure. The empire that built roads across 3 continents understood something that modern life quietly lets us forget. Sleep, shared among a group, is a form of collective trust, and breaking that trust even once could unravel an entire army before dawn. And the punishment for oversleeping didn't stop with clients or soldiers. It reached even further down, into the fields and farmhouses that fed the empire. The Roman statesman Cato the Elder, in his farming Manual de Agricultura, laid out precise instructions for how an estate's overseer, the Vilicus, should manage enslaved laborers. Workers were expected to rise before dawn and be at their tasks the moment there was enough light to see by. An overseer who allowed his workers to sleep late was considered negligent, and the laborers themselves faced beatings for it, administered without trial, without appeal, at the discretion of a single man holding a whip. There was no salutatio to miss here, no stipend to lose, just a body expected to move the instant the sky lightened, whether it was rested or not. Picture that farmhouse at first light. Straw mats on a hard floor. The overseer's footsteps already crossing the yard before anyone else has stirred. A slave who has slept a few minutes too long doesn't lose a friendship or a favor. He loses skin. Multiply that single farmhouse by the thousands of estates scattered across Roman Italy, and oversleeping stops looking like an isolated cruelty. It looks like a structural feature of how the entire economy ran, from the wheat fields to the city gates to the Legionary wall. This is where sleep science offers a darker layer to the story, one that makes the punishment feel almost cruelly mismatched to human biology. Neuroscientist Jerome Siegel, who has studied sleep patterns among hunter-gatherer societies including the Hadza, the San, and the Tsimane, has found that pre-industrial humans, left to their own devices, don't force themselves into long, rigid stretches of forced overnight vigilance. Left alone, people tend to rest in shorter, layered stretches, guided by fatigue rather than by orders. Rome's military system didn't work with that underlying biology. It worked directly against it, demanding a level of enforced wakefulness the human body was never built to sustain without failure, and then treating that inevitable failure as a moral crime rather than as exhausted flesh finally giving out. So hold both worlds in your mind at once. In the city, oversleeping cost you status, coin, and connection, one slammed door at a time. On the frontier, it could cost you your life, delivered by the clubs of your own comrades. Two dramatically different punishments, born from the exact same root fear. That a sleeping body, even for a moment, was a liability someone else would inevitably have to pay for. If a story like this is the kind of hidden history you want more of, this channel exists entirely for nights like tonight. So take a second to stay close, because the strangest part is still ahead. Here's the twist that reframes everything you've just heard. Rome, the empire so famous for order, for engineered roads and codified law and aqueducts that still stand today, never actually possessed a single, fixed, uniform clock. Its entire punishing relationship with lateness was built on top of a measurement of time that shifted daily, unequal hour by unequal hour, subject to season, latitude, and the exact angle of a sundial's shadow at that moment. The empire didn't discover punctuality and then build a precise tool to measure it. It invented the anxiety of punctuality first, the fear of being late, and only afterward built loose, shifting technology to approximate it. The dread came before the precision ever did. Now bring all of this back to tonight, to your own bed, your own alarm. It goes off. You hit snooze once, maybe twice, maybe 3 times, watching the minutes slide by with a flicker of guilt you can't quite explain. That feeling has a 2,000-year-old ancestor living inside it. It's the same low-grade dread a Roman client felt jogging through dark, uneven streets toward a patron's locked door. It's the same fight against gravity a young sentry felt on a cold wall, forcing his eyes to stay open before dawn, knowing exactly what waited for him if they didn't. It's even the same flinch a farmhand felt at the first sound of footsteps crossing the yard, The stakes around you have changed almost beyond recognition. A missed alarm today rarely ends in violence or ruin. Nobody is waiting outside your door with a locked gate and a vanished stipend. No one is standing over you with a club. And yet modern culture still finds ways to echo that old Roman logic, dressing it up in new language. Rise and grind. The 5 a.m. club. The quiet shame baked into every still in bed. Text message. We didn't inherit the punishments. We inherited the underlying belief that made the punishments feel justified in the first place. That a sleeping body is a body failing some invisible obligation to everyone else awake. That belief is worth questioning tonight. Your body isn't failing anyone by resting. It's doing exactly what a body left to itself has always done, long before sundials, long before alarm clocks, long before anyone decided that lateness deserved a price. Rome didn't invent sleep or the need for it. It invented the fear around it and handed that fear down through 2,000 years of mornings until it landed quietly in your bedroom tonight. You think oversleeping is a modern sin, a private shame between you and your alarm clock. It isn't. It's one of the oldest fears the human body carries, inherited from clients who lost their stipend at a locked door, and from soldiers who closed their eyes for a moment too long and never opened them again.